So as a small permaculture nursery, we work with the seasons. About a month ago, we pretty much wrapped up doing our bare root shipping and bare root sales. There are plants that have been left over, and so we've got buckets now of shrubs and trees, of aronia and hazelnut and also chestnuts and all sorts of plants that still need to go somewhere. A lot of them we planted back out in rows into the garden, but we also are potting up some plants for local sales. And the things I'm going to talk about in this video, I've at least touched on in a lot of other videos, and I'll refer to them as I go. But I wanted to make a synthesis of how we pot up plants in a way that, after 8 years or so of doing it, is incredibly, I've found, incredibly functional and creates really healthy little micro ecosystems. And the concept is basically potting up plants in the spirit of how hugel mounds are created. Now, hugel mound, just very briefly, a lot of you are going to be familiar with this. The idea is making permanent raised beds that have at the heart of them larger, chunky, woody debris, with the idea that as water inundates that, heavy rains, winter, etc., those logs, those woody debris can soak up excess water and then release it to plant roots later on. And so in a pot, we can actually mimic hugel mounds a little bit. Let me show you what I mean. When I go to pot up a plant, so in this case, I'm going to pot up two plants together. I'm doing sea berry and sea kale, mainly for the alliteration. Also because I think they're going to be so beautiful together, and sea berry, being a really wonderful nitrogen-fixing shrub, will be very compatible with having a potent herbaceous ground cover underneath it. These two ought to work nicely together in a pot or in final soil. But to pot these up, the first thing I'm going to do is, in this larger pot, I'm going to lay in the base of my hugel mound, so to speak. And in this case, I'm just using straight wood chips. Now, some of you are going to see this and say, you've got to be kidding me. There's no way plants are going to grow with wood chips at the bottom. Here's a little trick to be aware of. In our chicken system, we've got sprouted seeds all over the place. Now, in this case, this is wheat. Absolutely optional, but what I've learned over time is that if you add a little bit of seed of something like wheat or oat to the very bottom of one of these pots, that rotting debris has a lot of sugar and nutrient and can really fuel fungal life and support earthworm life. I might even take it a tiny step further and add a tiny bit of sawdust spawn for wine cap stropharia mushroom. I didn't plant this here with, why not, a hickory nut, because as you know if you watch our videos, the squirrels plant what they like to plant too. We'll save this and put this in the pot too. But I'll add a little bit of sawdust spawn for wine cap. So now we've inoculated it with beneficial, useful, edible mushrooms. I'll save the hickory. I'll put a little more wood chip. So now we've got this rich, fungal starting, sweet base that whenever this plant is watered, it's going to have a huge reservoir of excess nutrient and water that it can get access to. So, from the base of the hugel mound, I'm going to come over to our potting mix, which I'll just say, in our experience, does not need to be perfect perlite, vermiculite, peat moss, blah 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 BS. This is shredded leaves. Our chickens basically shred leaves all winter. This is rotting food scraps. This is chunks of wood. This is pine cones. There may be a bone in there. That's all fine. Use your discretion, but I will say, after potting up over many thousands of plants, we've yet to have a plant up and die because a bone was in there or a wood chip wasn't fully decomposed.
Usually the roots wrap around those.
Yeah, it's amazing how often the roots will be inside of an old pine cone or wrap around a stick. You know, if it's too coarse or if you're potting up something tiny, sure, set them out for the next plant. So now what I'll do here though, is we'll get this filled up. Again, I'm not worried about these chunks. I will take my sea berry, settle it in. start putting soil around it. Pro tip, I have 2 hands and sometimes I need to steady a plant. You can see my very strange trick is, I'll show if you zoom out a little, use my mouth to steady the plant. Kind of odd, but it feels like a sweet way to hold the plant up. Anyway, that's the sea berry, and for alliteration, we'll put in a sea kale. Now these are rooted chunks of root that I used bottom heat with segments of root in the winter to help stimulate rooting and top growth. We'll put that in. You can use your imagination, anything that maybe cilantro, ciorol could go in, I'm not sure. But, so this is just a 2-way functional guild, but this will work in the pot. Now I'm going to come back over and going to deeply bury the whole thing right up to the lip in wood chips, which creates a really great mulch in pot. Kind of burying everybody. Now that it's potted up, last but not least, I give it an initial soak. And we talk about our very simple compost tea bubbler in another video, which I'll link to here. But basically, this is an aerobic compost tea. There's blackstrap molasses in here. It's bubbling away with some organic fish emulsion, some finished compost, tiny splash of urine. This incredibly rich nutrient bath. What's crazy though with all the bubbles, it actually cleans your hands better than soap. It's amazing. And our dog Henry, this is his preferred drinking water of anything, so it must be incredibly nourishing for all the beings. So we let it soak in here, and then bring it up on the rack. Waste not, want not. All the juices, the leftover compost tea, comes back into our soaking bath, and once this is done dripping, it can go out and sit and rest. This system, with an average rainfall summer, or even a droughty year, we do not need to water these plants more than maybe 4 or 5 times a growing season. That's right, 4 or 5 times in a growing season. In a wetter year here in central New York State, we don't have to water these at all, and often these plants will overwinter in the pots, in part I think because of all the insulation and all of the microclimate within that space. And if we're lucky, edible mushrooms will gush out of these in the pot or wherever they're planted, either at our site or at a new person's site. So this is a recycled pot using free wood chips, using compost our chickens made. You could source this from your woods or somewhere where there's just piles of old rotting leaves. With plant material we propagated in low-tech ways that now has some real value, and hopefully some of those bits have been useful. It's pretty funny. We finished the shot and then I realized, oh, I forgot to plant that hickory nut that the squirrels had put in the sawdust. We went inside for a minute or two, came back out. We're going to do the last shot where I took the hickory nut and put it in the pot. I mean, it's been a couple of minutes. Hickory nut is gone, so I thought I would plant it out, but it turns out some red squirrel or chipmunk already found some other place. So for those of you that were watching and pay attention to the details, we forgot, but the other creatures took care of it.